I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On tonight's episode, we have a guest, SEC Michael Bratton joins the show to preview the Florida-Tennessee game. Michael Bratton from that SEC podcast is a Tennessee grad, knows a lot about his Vols, gives a little travel tips too for those of you heading up to Knoxville as well at the end of the interview. 4 bits, we'll talk about that USF game. Bit of a struggle, got through it with the victory. We'll break it down start to finish there. Talked plenty on that one. 6 bits, we'll let Will Miles break down his statistic, yards above replacement, aka YAR, to provide us with yet another way to fully appreciate the artistry of Will Rogers in Mississippi State's offense that Will Miles loves so much. And for $1, we will check out the 2023 schedule, which dropped earlier this afternoon. We'll run through each game and give our thoughts on how it shapes up for year 2 of the Billy Napier era. Will, Michael Bratton, that SEC podcast, join us for a Tennessee preview. Give us a little background on Mike here.
Yeah, I mean, so Mike's had me on his show a few times. He's a great guy, obviously a Tennessee grad, enjoys his Vols, but it's been sort of a house of horrors for Vols fans recently. But graciously came on and is coming on and helping us here preview some of the things that maybe we don't know about Tennessee. So SEC expert, passionate about the SEC, but certainly as well passionate about the Vols. And like you said, we're going to ask him about some of the travel tips that you have if you're going to go to Knoxville and check out the game. So certainly if you're heading up there, reach out to us afterwards and let us know whether any of those places he mentioned were good. And, we'll relay that back to him.
Yeah, really down to earth guy too. Really enjoyed talking to him. It was the first time I've spoken with him. So he's a great guy. Good interview. Let's not delay. Let's get right to it. Joining us today, another guest on Stand Up and Holler for the Florida-Tennessee preview. We have Tennessee grad himself, Michael Bratton, from that SEC podcast. He's also on Twitter at SEC Mike. If you haven't checked out his show on YouTube, be sure to check it out. Mike, thank you so much for joining Will and I tonight on Stand Up and Holler.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure. It's a big weekend on Rocky Top. This is, the weekend we all look forward to here in the state of Tennessee, and then it's usually the weekend we start looking forward to basketball season.
The last decade, that's a fair qualifier, I'd say. But let's go back to just a short time ago in our time machine here to January of 2021. Josh Heupel brought in to rave reviews from people like Clay Travis, who said Danny White hiring Josh Heupel is like taking your cousin to prom. He did clarify that was not a good thing for Tennessee fans. He did clarify that was a good thing. Not a good thing. He also said, Josh Heupel, no enthusiasm, no excitement, no energy, no reason to believe that he's going to be able to succeed. He said a lot of other things, but we'll just keep it and boil it down to that simple of a reaction. I think a lot of people who did not follow what the type of success Danny White and Josh Heupel had down in Orlando very closely had a similar reaction to this hire. Coming off, felt like a disappointment at the time. My immediate reaction was the guy's going to bring offense. It's going to be fun, more fun to watch than what you guys have been watching the last decade for sure. But is there no enthusiasm this weekend, no energy, no excitement with College Game Day coming to town here, Mike?
Oh, I mean, this is the biggest game in Tennessee football history. Game day, like you said, Barstool's going to be there. Josh Pate's going to be down there. I mean, yeah, Checker Neyland, can't wait for that. They even, I thought they were going to break out the smoky gray uniforms like they usually do, but they're going more traditional. So they're keeping the old farts happy too this weekend. They get mad every time we break out those, but it is funny you say that because, I don't claim to be like the ultimate insider or anything like that, but I do have a really good connection with these coaching searches. And I got tipped off that Heupel was going to be the hire maybe about an hour before it was reported. And I passed it along to my Tennessee buddies, and they all pass. We don't want him. And then as soon as he's hired, my God, look at these numbers. Like, this is the best hire they could have made. But yeah, I know a lot of people thought UCF actually got the better trade because Gus went down there and Heupel came up north. But yeah, he's been a revelation. And you got to remember, I think it's been 16 games since he's been at Tennessee. And this is a program that had 25 plus players go into the portal. They were just a travesty on offense under Jeremy Pruitt. They with Jarrett Garantano, they had nothing working. This was a program that, and this is not a shot at Barrett Sallee. This was something that a lot of people were kind of sensing, but he famously said Tennessee will not go to a bowl game for 5 seasons. And like I said, that's not a shot. That's a sense a lot of people had. But immediately got Tennessee overachieving, and they got blown out by Georgia, but we're used to getting blown out by everybody in the SEC. So the fact that he was able to make it a little bit more competitive against teams like Alabama and a little bit Georgia there, it's just remarkable the job that Josh Heupel does or has done so far for Tennessee. I'm not sitting here saying that they're number one. I don't know if Tennessee is really the number 11 team in the country, but just the fact that they've gone from no buzz to one of the hottest teams in the country, it's a remarkable turnaround.
Well, Michael, I mean, I have a question for you. I mean, really, when it comes down to the quarterback position, that's been sort of a place that just hasn't had anybody at Tennessee for a really long time. I mean, maybe like you think about Casey Clausen is maybe the last guy that I can really think of and name at the quarterback position there for Tennessee. And now you got Hendon Hooker, came over from Virginia Tech. Joe Milton started last year, and then Hooker took over right around the Florida game, actually. Missed a couple of throws against Florida, but then sort of took off from there. What do you see with Hooker, and what is it that makes him special within Heupel's offense there at Tennessee and that's really making it go?
Well, I think you could make the case that Hendon Hooker is the most efficient quarterback in the country. Now, you could obviously throw Bryce Young in there. Stetson Bennett right now is playing very efficiently as well, but I believe his number is, I could be wrong, it's either 40 or 42 touchdowns since taking over and only 3 interceptions. So he's protecting the football. That's the key to this. And his ability to run is kind of like the icing on the cake that just makes Tennessee so difficult to defend. Now, he's got some issues. I think pushing the ball down the field, a little inaccurate doing that. And I brought a couple stats. I know, Will, you're a stat guy here, but, Hendon Hooker, the first couple of games, 4 of 8 to start game 1, and this is against Ball State. Against Pitt, he was 2 of 8 to start the game. And then last week against Akron, 4 of 8. So I don't know if he's getting too hyped. A lot of his passes are high, and then I just trashed him there. But he does lock in immediately after. But I think that'll be critical for the Gators on Saturday. Get Hendon Hooker off schedule and hope and pray you can continue that into the second and third quarter. Third quarter might be a little bit more of an issue for Florida, given what I've seen from them so far this year. But, I'm not quite sold on the fact that Florida is going to get blown out in this ball game. I'm sorry if I'm skipping ahead here.
We've also had we've relied on the opposing quarterback to make key mistakes at opportune times to lock in a couple wins. Hendon Hooker, not a guy who 3 interceptions last year against 31 TD passes. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Mike, but just a very efficient guy, like Mike said, not going to make a lot of mistakes this weekend, so we can't count on that for the defense. Mike, this is a team, a lot of preseason hype around it. You've so far come out. You talked about the big win against Ball State. That game against Pitt, that was a hard-fought game against the defending ACC champs. That's a tough Pitt team right there, too. They played a good game the week before against West Virginia. Good comeback there. So that was a tough win on the road, tough environment. You go up there, you get the win, and then demolish Akron, take care of business in a game where you should take care of business. How are you feeling about this team as you build into this game? We know this Florida game, the last 16 to 17 years, has not been friendly to Tennessee. What's the confidence level from Vols Nation heading into this game?
0 out of 10 with that damn Florida voodoo. I mean, they're excited, but confident is not the right word I would use. Now, it may be different for Josh Heupel and these players. I mean, they're obviously just 0-1 against Florida, and it was a different staff, a different quarterback, so many different variables. But yeah, from the fan base, they are certainly fired up for this ball game. But I don't know if confident is the right word that I would use, because it's just it seems like we're here, if not every other year, every 3 or 4 years. There's hype train. I mean, even Dooley got a game day down at Tennessee, and I'm trying to think of the Florida quarterback. All I remember from that day, I still have nightmares of it, is Trey Burton running wild. And was like, who the hell's this guy? Treon Harris. I mean, that's another one. I mean, my God, Treon Harris beat you, and Will Muschamp. It has just been a house of horse. Felipe Franks, I never thought was that good, but he sure as hell was good enough to throw that Hail Mary, wasn't he? So, I mean, another one was who was the guy that got suspended, and he was, I guess he was taking PEDs or something. Will Greer, and then it was just, I mean, it's just one thing after another. So, yeah, this Anthony Richardson is going to play the game of his life. I'm convinced of it, and this is going to be a 4-quarter ball game. And Billy Napier, 18-3 in 1-score games. That obviously favors Florida if it is a tight game.
Man, I was hoping for at least a 4 out of 10 so we could start chipping away at it, Will.
Well, I mean, look, I think we're less confident than the Tennessee fans, at least right now, given what we've seen so far. But look, I mean, I don't think anybody doubted that Hypo was going to be able to get the offense going. I think the thing that's been at least comforting for Tennessee fans so far is the defense has played pretty well, especially against the run. Now, certainly the opponents that Tennessee has played have not been fantastic. I mean, you look at Akron and Ball State; those are sort of cupcakey, they're FBS opponents, but they're, the FPI rankings are down in the 120s. Pitt, pretty good team. How much of the defensive improvement that we've seen so far statistically for Tennessee do you think is actually related to an improvement in defense? And how much of it is the opponents that Tennessee's played? Or is that kind of what we're going to find out against Florida this weekend in terms of, has the defense taken a step forward to make Tennessee a real contender in the SEC? Or is it still sort of, that's going to be the Achilles heel of the team?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's half and half, to be honest with you, because I even thought last year Tennessee's defense was much better than their stats overall would indicate. And a lot of that had to do with the fact that they just had no depth. And we saw it in the bowl game. Alontae Taylor, who went on to become a draft pick, he opted out of the bowl game. They couldn't stop Purdue. And we're talking one player. But that's how thin they were in the secondary. Tennessee was lacking depth. They were lacking star power. Now, they did develop 3 of those defensive players actually went on to be draft picks in the NFL. But just as the SEC schedule got going, the defense really, really started to fall apart. Kentucky tore them to pieces. Obviously, Alabama, Georgia, Florida had their way with them. So, the better teams had their way with them. But I was always impressed with how hard they fought for Tim Banks. And now we're going into another year. Most of those players are back, and the depth is significantly better. So I do think this is a better defense. I think the advanced numbers say this is a top 25 defense. That is inflated by the opponents. Pitt, now you got to credit Tennessee's defense. They, you never root for injuries or anything, but they did knock Slovis out of that game. And the guy they brought in was just god awful. I mean, he could barely do anything. So even their best opponent didn't even have their starting quarterback in the ball game. And I think you hit on it. The run defense, it's looked good so far, but the competition is obviously the reason for that, in my opinion. And I think that's Florida's key to the football game is pounding the rock. I don't think I'm telling you guys anything you don't know, but if they can run in this football game, they've got a shot.
Yeah, Jalen Hyatt out of that Tennessee backfield on the offensive side they haven't put up killer numbers in the run game yet here, but that's not where they're going to beat you. They're going to beat you. And Will, last year, what do we say? How many wide open shots did Tennessee missed a few open shots? They hit a few downfield shots against Florida, but they had plenty of opportunities there last year that we were saying, hey, if they start converting on those, that's going to look like a different team. They started to convert on more of those, and 2 of the guys that are responsible for this passing game here, Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman. Give us a little bit about both those receivers, what to look for on the outside, and what will be the biggest test the corners on the Florida secondary have faced on the outside to this point.
Yeah, well, it could be good news for the Gators, because I don't know if Cedric Tillman is going to play. He got banged up in the last ball game. He is far and away the best receiver. And one thing I really like about him that you don't talk a lot about in receivers, which is underrated in this offense, is his ability to run block. He's very big, very physical. Heupel loves to throw a lot of these screens all the way to the numbers, and Cedric Tillman's ability to block there would certainly be missed. Now they do have Brew McCoy, who was the 5-star recruit. Based on what little I've seen of him, he's not a 5-star talent on the field, but he's very physically imposing. he'll get up there and get you the 50-50 balls. He can maybe sub for Tillman in the blocking aspect, but Cedric Tillman, I don't think it's a stretch to say he may be the best receiver in the SEC. So if he's out, clearly advantage for Florida on that one. Jalen Hyatt, you asked me about. I think he's in the top 5, I think, right now in SEC receiving yards. He is fast. He's your deep threat. He's your slot player. He got going late last season, and right now he's been their most productive receiver. If I'm Florida, every single play, you got to know where number 11 is, because Heupel, he pushes the ball several times a quarter, and most of those passes are going to Jalen Hyatt right now. So he's someone you have to account for on every single play if you're Florida.
Yeah. So every team, every fan knows what the weakness of their defense is. And, for Florida, we certainly, with Ventrell Miller out, we're sitting here, white knuckled about what's going to happen there. But I'm curious, for you as a Tennessee fan, what's the spot that you look at on the defensive side of the ball and say, this is a weakness and Florida might be able to exploit this weakness? Assuming obviously that we get your prediction, Anthony Richardson plays the game of his life. But where is the place that you think that Florida might be able to take advantage of Tennessee on the defensive side?
Well, the good news for Tennessee is, I don't know if it's good news, but good news for this matchup is maybe the secondaries, particularly at safety. Tennessee's safeties are, they're decent players, but they're slow. They're bigger and they're slow. They've been looking to upgrade at that position for a little while. The corners are relatively new. Kamal Hadden he didn't play much at all last season. I think he transferred in and was banged up. He has emerged. He's a lot better now. He's their number 1 corner. But I certainly would think the secondary would be Tennessee's issue, which again, I don't know. I don't have confidence fully that Anthony Richardson can test them with his arm. If he plays like he does against Utah, they'll have no issue. But I think people don't understand how good Kentucky's linebackers are. And I thought that was paramount to that football game, keeping Anthony Richardson in check. Tennessee, I don't think has got anywhere near the linebackers that Kentucky has. They got a couple tackling machines. Jeremy Banks led the team in tackles last season. He's back. This year, it's a guy, Aaron Beasley, who he was god-awful last year. I mean, he's a guy that the fans are waiting for him to be replaced, but he has significantly stepped up his game. He may be their best linebacker now. But again, I don't know if you're telling me Aaron Beasley versus Anthony Richardson, assuming Anthony Richardson's 100% healthy, I'm going to take Anthony Richardson every time. So I think that's going to be a real problem if I don't think Tennessee's got a really good spy for Anthony Richardson. So I think that, like I said, I think this is going to be a really good matchup for AR.
Well, let's see if you'll need that spy after watching last week there. Well, hopefully they'll incorporate some of that run game there. Well, hey, Mike, we told you we're not going to take up a ton of your time tonight here. I do want to ask something for folks that are traveling up to Knoxville. I personally have not been to Knoxville for a game. Will, have you been?
I did. I went back in 2018 when they had the fumble on the throwback to, was it your tight end or your fullback, where C.J. Henderson tracked him down.
Oh, that was a play.
It was pretty awesome. It's always fun when you go on the road and you get to walk out with the victory. So.
Yeah, I've been on both sides of that on the road. I've been on a couple brutal losses, couple great wins, but I have not done Knoxville yet, which I need to do at some point. For people who are going up there for the first time, give us a break. Give us a couple bars, restaurant, couple what do you do game day up there? What should they check out if they haven't seen it for the first time?
Yeah, my favorite part of the city, when I was in school there, man, downtown was okay, but even prior to that, it was like a place you didn't want to leave. Even your worst enemy, you didn't want to leave them there at night. But it's a great place now, and it's so convenient right to campus. There's an area called Market Square, which is, they don't allow cars in there, so you could just walk through, and there's about 10 to 20 bars and restaurants of all various kinds in there. But it's not the best, but Soccer Taco, they have these giant margaritas for like $5. That's a good place to get messed up. But right across the street is the Tequila Bar. That's the best place in Knoxville, if you ask me. But if you go down to Market Square, you're going to find a food option that you like, several good bars. And then right next to that is the Old City, which is, that may be even nicer, but it's a little bit further away from campus and the stadium and everything. I would recommend any of your listeners go downtown and hit up, it's called Gay Street. and right there, Market Square. That's the place to be.
And what about the Vol Navy? Is there anything like, is that an experience that people should have if they go in there? I mean, we hear a lot about it, but where do you go if you want to take a look at that?
Oh yeah. So there's another. It's not the best food, but it's like kind of where you recommend people that have never been to Knoxville to go. It's called Calhoun's on the River. It's barbecue, and right there they'll have all the boats pull up, and that is a good time. If you're going down there on game day, you got to get down there early because it's going to be packed. There's going to be tons of people. But I'll tell you guys a funny story. We all know Val Navy, so they show up in the boats to avoid parking, and it's right across the street from the stadium. Well, I guess it would have been 2019. One of the boats caught fire and burned down, and everybody thought it was funny, it was hilarious, it was a meme, but all that was a damn omen to Georgia State coming down. It was an hour later. Everybody should have known when the Vol Navy caught fire, something terrible was about to happen, and boy did it. Jeremy Pruitt in Tennessee lost to Georgia State. That's still one of the worst losses I've ever seen in my life.
I have not heard that story. That's great. That's great. Well, Mike, really appreciate the time. Will, we might have to start a travel channel, SEC travel channel here, man. I don't know. I like Mike just sold Knoxville here. I got to get up there.
Yeah,
Mike,
my brother-in-law lives in Knoxville, so next time I get down there, we'll have to go check out Calhoun's on the River. Right? He didn't have that information last time I was there.
Oh, I've got one more story for you guys, if that's all right.
Yeah,
go for it.
So when I was at Tennessee, a freshman, so my dad, he used to take me to the games, but I didn't realize like how wild Tennessee could really get. I had no idea. And the story that I give, I was just, you're walking around and there's people drinking. It's a party for every direction of miles and miles and miles. I was walking. There was Florida fans. There was a group of them. And this guy was like a couple floors up, this really bad apartment complex. He throws a beer at these people, a glass bottle smashes right in front of them. They did nothing to warrant this behavior. And this guy just screams. He says, "Hey, Florida fans, I'll see you in hell." And I was like, what in the world is going on? But any Florida fans want to know what they're getting themselves into. I do not condone that behavior, but it was one of the damn wildest things I've ever seen. And I don't think it's calmed down much since those days.
They were not overly polite as I walked into the stadium. That is for sure.
I apologize for those people.
We heard some stories. The Utah fans were a little surprised when they came to Gainesville, I think. They were like, oh my, that's just uncalled for. A little bit of that out of the Utah fans. But SEC, man, what can you say? SEC.
That's why we love it, man. We're passionate.
That's right. Hey, plug your podcast. Where can we catch you? How many days a week you do the show? Everything else, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. That SEC podcast available on all podcast platforms. We're the highest rated SEC show on Apple and Spotify. We're on YouTube. So come check us out. And SEC Mike on Twitter. A lot of shenanigans. Don't take anything I say too seriously on there. But the show is a lot more serious than my Twitter feed. I'll tell you that.
It's good stuff. Great setup too. I like the setup for the show too that you got there. You got a nice studio there. So best of luck on the rest of the season there, Mike. Have some fun on Saturday, but maybe not too much fun. All right.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thanks so much, Michael.
Bye.
Take care.
All right, let's pick up here in 4 bits. We're going to cover the USF game. First off, one more time. That was Michael Bratton from that SEC podcast. Great stories about Tennessee, Will. Good get on that guest there. And be sure to check out his stuff on all platforms. He's on YouTube as well. Will, let's get to USF here. First off, you got to start with it's a win. All right, 31-28. It's a win. It wasn't pretty. We needed some help from a team that has otherwise been not very good, that started their season down 38-0 at home to BYU. But I'll tell you what, I Billy Napier after the game, in the heat of the moment, I wasn't having any of the, USF's really building that program up. They're doing great. Let me say something about this loss for USF. This loss is the best win that Jeff Scott has had since he took over as head coach at USF. This is the best win he's had because the Bulls played out of their mind. I live in Tampa. I catch a lot of USF games just to at least pay attention to the program, what's going on. and they played a fantastic football game. Bohannon was absolutely unstoppable in the run game. You highlighted it well in your USF review article there on Sunday, Will, with some of the run fits. I'll let you get into that in a minute here. But Bohannon was great. The running backs were great. The scheme was good for USF. They were just moving the ball up and down the field all night long, but critical mistakes at critical times end up costing the game. So credit to the Gators for forcing some of those. One of those critical mistakes, an interception forced by pressure. Brent Cox decides to stay home on this particular play, ends up forcing a high throw, which Trevez Johnson intercepts, and Anthony Richardson, that running game, is able to punch it into the end zone after throwing an interception near the end zone the first time there. Well, hey, look, you still let USF go down the field and nearly kick a field goal to tie the game. Send it to overtime. A bad snap saves the day there for the Gators. Can we also talk about, though, how amazing that kick was? That kicker almost made that kick after a horrible hold off a pretty good snap there, Will. Just a lot of lucky plays that end up saving the day, but you do got to give the credit to the Gators for making some plays here and there down the stretch to salvage the win.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think this is an interesting one because as I rewatch it, there's a lot of stuff that's correctable, where things aren't that far from being good. When it's 24-13, they were actually driving down the field before Richardson throws the interception. If they could have put a field goal up or a touchdown there, the game's out of reach. Of course, obviously throws the interception and they convert it into a touchdown right away, and then that changes the complexion of the game overall. Richardson, again, a second straight bad game, not as bad as the game against Kentucky. The game against Kentucky was really bad. This game, limited. I think he's clearly limited in terms of what he can do through the air. Airmailed Pearsall on one that would have been a first down on a drive that wound up being a 3-and-out. But also, he's not getting a whole lot of help. There were some false starts and some things that sort of set him back there in the second half that, the tight ends need to stay on sides, but they're limited in terms of what they can do. I think the defense, it's interesting when you actually look at like a yards per play basis. Florida was giving up 7.4 yards per play in the first quarter, 6.3 in the second, but then only gave up 3.6 and 4.0 in the third quarter and the fourth quarter. So did get more stops in the second half. And that did coincide with Brent Cox starting to step up. The problem is that they had really short fields, right? I mean, the interception by Richardson gives them a short field. They turn that into a touchdown. They had one drive sort of between the third and the fourth quarter where they're able to put up another touchdown, and that puts Florida on the ropes. The biggest thing, and I think, Richardson obviously is 1A, 1B, 1C. They got to get him on track in order to make sure that the season doesn't go down the tubes. But the biggest thing is, if you look at the defense against Kentucky, if you look at the defense against Utah, they were 8 of 13 on third down. You look against USF, they were 8 of 15 on third down and 2 of 2 on fourth down. So 59% overall completion or conversion percentage. And against Kentucky, they were 4 of 13. So, that is the key. This defense has to find a way to get off the field on third down. And they really weren't able to force USF into any situations where they were sitting there. Well, that's not true because they had the 3rd and 18 that was converted on a running play and some other things. So when they got them on the ropes, they weren't able to convert. And a lot of times they didn't have them on the ropes, right? Like the 51-yard run on 4th and 1. I mean, that was a nice play design. You're going to get hit by that every once in a while. It's the fact that it seems to happen over and over and over and over again where the team just is not disciplined enough to get off the field on third down. That's going to have to change against Tennessee because they're going to hit some big plays. The Volunteers are going to hit some big plays. And when you have an opportunity to get off the field, you're going to have to, and I'm just not sure they can. And conversely, when you look at third downs for Florida, 7 of 12 against Utah, 4 of 16 against Kentucky, and 3 of 8 against USF. Now that says something, right? That they were 3 of 8. One is that they didn't have a whole lot of third downs and they didn't have a whole lot of possessions. And so, the offense struggled. That's certainly true, especially in the second half and the third quarter specifically. But it's not as though they had a lot of possessions. I mean, they scored every possession they had in the first half. They had a field goal, 2 touchdowns, and then a kneel. And those were their 4 possessions in the first half. So I think I come out of the USF game discouraged with everything, right? I mean, you sit there, you look at it and go, Richardson play wasn't great. I didn't think the game plan was very good. I think they need to be realistic and let Montrell Johnson have the ball a lot more, ETN as well. I was disappointed that Shorter didn't give a better effort on the ball that was thrown into the end zone that got intercepted. But hey, like you said, they came out with a win, and being 2-1 is a whole lot better than being 1-2, but it doesn't breed a whole lot of confidence going into this game against the Vols.
Yeah, absolutely discouraging effort. I feel that USF outplayed us for most of the night. They also made more mistakes. They made bigger mistakes than us, and I think that's what ultimately cost USF the game.
So I disagree with that. I don't think USF outplayed Florida. I think Florida was the better team. I think Florida had the lead for the most part. Florida drives all the way down, and then Richardson throws the interception. Florida gets an interception back, turns that into a touchdown. I think at any point it felt like Florida could put their foot on the gas, and if they just stopped shooting themselves in the foot, that they'd be able to take over. The problem is that with a quarterback who's struggling as much as he is, Florida's ability to put the foot on the gas is limited. The issue there is that USF didn't have a quarterback who could do anything other than shoot himself in the foot either. And so, look, I mean, he threw the ball 28 times and did average 4.1 yards per throw, and he had 3 picks. So, and
right,
granted,
they made big mistakes.
Yeah, granted, 15 runs for 102 yards, but let's be honest, Hendon Hooker's gonna throw for 300 yards, and he's gonna average 9 yards a throw, given what we've seen so far. And I think a lot of the questions have been about Anthony Richardson coming out of this game, but to me, the most disappointing part is not Anthony Richardson. The most disappointing part was the defense, considerably.
Yeah, and that's really, especially on. I thought the USF offense had its way with the defense for a good part of the game. The defense did step up and make some big plays, forcing some of those mistakes on USF to the defense's credit there. Offensively, what's the deal? Are we just holding Anthony back? Like, we're not. I think I heard Jordan Rogers say it about 97 times about wanting to have more design run actions with Anthony Richardson. I'm pretty sure most everybody in orange and blue watching the game agrees with that. How much of it is that Jack Miller's out? How much of it is that maybe they're being a little conservative heading into the Tennessee game and looking ahead a little bit? And how much of it is that Napier's wanting to develop Richardson as a passer a little bit, is maybe being stubborn about it and not necessarily, because you saw the Utah game plan look significantly different than the Kentucky game plan, than the USF game plan. And that's what I think. Maybe that Tennessee game, maybe we're going to go back to seeing some of those rollouts and some of those bootleg actions from Richardson, but we haven't seen it the last 2 weeks.
I mean, so there's a couple of things. One, they tried some of those bootleg actions. Every time they did, USF's defensive end stayed home, and they were able to force him into throwing the ball away or running out of bounds after he sort of outran the guy to the corner. They're going to have some actions off of that. You got to have variation off that. In fact, they tried it either late in the third quarter or early in the fourth. They tried something where they essentially moved to where they were running a read option, but it was a read option in the other direction towards that defensive end and putting the other defensive end in conflict. And so I think they're going to have to do some of that. I think they're going to have to take some deep shots, because I think they have to hit some deep shots. I think the reality is Richardson's been bad. And when you have a quarterback, when the defense is playing 2 deep coverage and there's a guy wide open over the middle, you have to hit him. And if you can't hit him, then what do you have left? Right? I mean, then if you can't hit him when he's wide open and you're not running the quarterback much at all, what's left? I don't know what's left. You're going to have to convert some third downs at some point along the way. You're going to have to take the thing that's easy. And that's the thing, is you take the deep shot when you have an opportunity, but then you got to be able to convert the easy throws. And so the thing that I highlighted in my article, and the thing I think you saw when you went back and looked at the film, is there are checkdowns all over the place, especially on 3rd and long. And he's going to have to learn to take those checkdowns. And hey, maybe it ends up 4th and 2 and you have to punt. But maybe Etienne or Johnson or even Naquan Wright makes a guy miss and you end up living another day and you got a first down. But you're not going to convert every 3rd down. But on 3rd and 7, when the defense is just dropping into a zone where there's nobody around the line of scrimmage, like, you're gonna have to, like, you're not gonna be able to throw in those windows. He's not accurate enough to throw in those windows. So there's gonna be some dump offs, and that to me is the thing that I'm hoping we see. I want to see 6 catches by the running backs in this game. They've got 4 total the entire year. I want to see 6 receptions from Montreal Johnson and Trevor Etienne in this particular game, because I think that's the only way you isolate the linebackers on Tennessee's defense. And the other thing is, when you have a spy, it means you're doing 2 things. You're only rushing 3 guys, or your running back is going to be open. because the spy is that linebacker who's spying is usually the linebacker who takes the running back out of the backfield. So make them pay for that, right? If they're going to spy Anthony Richardson, get the ball to the back. If they're going to go with the back, well, now Anthony Richardson has an opportunity to run. And if you're going to drop a bunch of people into zone, then there's going to be opportunities for Richardson to run when a play breaks down. And there's going to be an opportunity to hit a back and let him run for, 8, 9, 10 yards on a little dump off.
There's your role for Naquan Wright, because I'll tell you what, first few weeks here, Trevor Etienne and Montrell Johnson, it looks different when those two are on the field than when number 5's on the field.
Well, Johnson especially. I mean, there was a play, you and I were talking before he came on. There was a play, it was before he had an 18-yard gain on like a 3rd and 2 where he deked a couple of guys, and it was a really impressive run. But he had a more impressive one earlier. I think it was like a 9-yard run. Might have been on first down, but he cut north-south before you really saw the hole. So he saw the run developing before I did, certainly as I was looking. He saw his blocks setting up. That's experience in the system. That's knowing that if I put my foot in the ground and go north-south right now, by the time I get to the line of scrimmage, things are going to be opening up. And that kind of decisiveness is the way you end up with that 60-yard touchdown run. In fact, on the broadcast, Jordan Rodgers was saying that normally a running back breaks that outside, and that Montrell Johnson kept it inside. And that was one of the things that allowed him to have that big run. Those are the things that we're seeing. We're seeing 6, 7, 8-yard gains because he just puts his foot in the ground and goes north-south immediately. We're seeing that even when he gets hit behind the line of scrimmage, or even when someone is free, when he's behind the line of scrimmage, he's able to make a move. And then certainly to be able to turn a 2-yard gain into an 18-yard gain, those are the things we've seen as well. So look, I think Florida obviously has to run the ball. I think we'll all be really surprised if Florida comes out chucking the ball all over the place against Tennessee this week. But, look, Tennessee knows they're going to come and run the ball. And so you have to give it to your best running backs. You have to give it to the guys who, even when things break down, have an ability to fall forward for 4 yards, have an ability to turn a 4-yard gain into a 9-yard gain, have the ability to turn a 9-yard gain into a 30-yard gain, because you're not just going to get explosive plays from Anthony Richardson right now. At least that's not what we've seen the last 3 weeks. Really, there weren't a whole lot of explosives from him even against Utah, other than the 145-yard run. So, look, the running backs are where it's going to have to be at. And like you said, I think if you can get the ball to the running backs in space, and if you remember, in the LSU game last year, the play that really got Richardson's juices running was just a little halfback coming out of the backfield to Dameon Pierce right down the middle. That was the thing that sort of got everything started. And I think something like that, where he's able to get the ball to the running back in space, where it's an easy throw, but it's a guy who should be able to take a linebacker and should be able to beat him. I think that's the way you get him going. The idea that he's going to be able to throw the ball in between 3 guys in a zone, that's just not his game right now. And no one's giving him man-to-man to be able to go out and do it. In fact, when he got that, he had the one throw that he overthrew to short or deep left that was early. I actually thought it was a good read, but he overthrew him by 4 or 5 yards. And then he had the one on the next to last drive where he hit short or deep, just sort of threw it up and let Shorter go get it. Those are the kinds of things that your receiver has to go do. But hey, it's one-on-one coverage. You throw it out there. They gave you that opportunity. Other than that, South Florida didn't give him a whole lot of opportunities where he was throwing against one-on-one coverage. For the most part, they were always in zones, making him throw between spaces. And we saw a couple of miscommunications. There's one specifically I'm thinking about where he thought Shorter was going to settle in a zone, and Shorter ran it out, and the ball just went zipping right behind him.
Yeah.
And then across the middle, he just has not been accurate. And so I don't think the Tennessee is going to give him an opportunity to go outside all that much. I think they're going to try to funnel everything inside, hope that he airmails him a few times and that they get a couple of interceptions that way. If that happens, Florida's doomed. It's not a coincidence. Florida was ahead 16-7 before Richardson started throwing interceptions against Kentucky, and Florida was up 24-13 before Richardson started throwing interceptions against USF. If he can be turnover free, Florida has a shot in this game. If he starts turning the ball over, then it's a problem. And we've seen that when he has a turnover, it kind of snowballs into not just more turnovers, but snowballs into 3 and outs, a lack of confidence, all that sort of stuff. But I did see an interesting stat today. I don't know. I don't have it on me specifically, but his statistics on the road are way better than his statistics at home. And so, maybe there's some solace in going and being the enemy.
The LSU game.
Well, maybe so, but you know what? I mean, that was not a non-hostile environment, right? I mean, the guy played in a hostile environment. He went out and he performed, and you do wonder, you're in front of your friends at Florida. He grew up in Gainesville. Is he just pressing? And when he goes on the road, is he going to stop pressing because it's not that I have to go face my family and all my friends and all that stuff when I'm done. I'm just going to get back on the team bus and be any one of these players. I don't know. I mean, maybe that's something where being on the road is actually going to be a helpful thing just because he is a Gainesville kid. He is somebody who's from there. He feels this obligation to go out, like after the game against Kentucky, where he just played awful and must not have felt like it. He's out there playing catch with a bunch of kids who were by the stadium because he wants to be a role model for people in Gainesville. You don't have any of that crap when you go to Tennessee, right? You're just there to take on the Vols. That's it. That's your job. The pressure is you got to win the game, but the pressure is not that you got to go home and face all the people from your hometown and describe to them why you struggled. So, hopefully that's the case. Hopefully it takes a little bit of the pressure off, which is unusual, but hey, normally the starting quarterback at the University of Florida didn't grow up right in the shadow of the university. And maybe that makes a difference.
That could be part of it. It also could be, I think, what we've learned from this team through 3 games, Richardson's a good representation since this is a guy who is still fairly new to the spotlight. I mean, a lot of these guys, you see a lot of the guys making plays down the stretch. ETN, Johnson, Austin Barber had a nice game too on the offensive side of the ball. Will Shamar James, I believe, hopped on that first fumble. A lot of young guys running around making plays out there, and they're going to miss assignments too. And you're going to pay for those young guys being out there too sometimes. So I think that's what we're seeing this season, where it's really caused me to adjust my expectations a little bit here after 3 games, where just to have a little more patience with this team. I think instead of being frustrated constantly that we're not, I mean, the USF game was definitely frustrating. Blowing that Kentucky game was frustrating and everything, but maybe just being a little more patient with this team, letting them grow, getting the system. Billy Napier, every time he speaks, he stresses this is the first year we're in the system. First year the guys are doing this. Literally game 3 for Richardson in the system. I know the system has nothing to do with him throwing the ball 4 feet above Ricky Pearsall's head over the middle. I understand that. However, you see him on some of those throws, like that throw over the middle that you're talking about to Pearsall. I believe he kind of stepped up. His feet didn't really get set, and he's got incredible arm strength. But part of the reasons why he's inaccurate, some of those mechanics aren't all flowing at the same time right there at times with Richardson. So I think you're seeing that across the field on both sides of the ball. Let's flip over to the defense real quick. Brent Cox. Well, I've said this the last couple of years. And we know he's got incredible talent. This guy, you saw those last couple drives. Those are going to be on his highlight tape when he gets drafted this spring, potentially in the first round. He's got that level of talent. He's got that level of freak to him. He's super athletic, and he's a guy the NFL is going to love coming off the edge there. The man guesses a whole lot. Sometimes when he's right, it looks amazing. He made some key plays down the stretch that helped the Gators win. I think that's that also is kind of representative of what's going on with the defense a little bit, Will. I think there's a little bit, people are a little bit off on their assignments, causing people to cover for each other. What did you see? Why on 3rd and 18 is USF running the ball and getting a first down? What the heck happened on some of those plays this weekend?
Because not everybody's doing their job. And I think it starts with the linebackers. I think the loss of Ventrell Miller, I think the commentary by most people is, well, the loss of one player shouldn't make that big a difference, but it does make a difference because the linebacker's job on those run fits is to be in the gap and to take on the offensive lineman who's pulling through. Your job is to go in and stand him up and basically slow everything down and allow your teammates to come in and make the tackle. That's not what happened. What happened is that the linebackers tried to get around the offensive guard, and then the running back pulled right or cut basically right inside. And so, yeah, you can talk about Cox needs to set the edge better and needs to not guess and needs to know when there's a blitz coming from that side, certainly, so that he doesn't stay with the quarterback. But and look, that's all part of doing your job too. But it all starts with the linebackers. The linebackers, Bernie looked really lost on a bunch of different plays where he was getting caught up with the offensive lineman, but he also wasn't even in the right gap when the run was coming through. There was a play down in the red zone. It was a 3rd down play. I think Gator Dave put it up on his Twitter where Gervon Dexter is getting triple teamed. at the line of scrimmage. Cox and Avery Helm are coming from the left-hand side. They both take the quarterback. And Rashad Torrance, I don't know what he's doing because he's so far away from the line of scrimmage, given the numbers, that I'm just sitting there going, I don't understand what that alignment looked like, which means I think that they're misaligned. It's a process. You're learning all that sort of stuff. But Torrance is junior now. I mean, this is something where Torrance, Bernie, Cox, those guys need to be lined up correctly, and they need to know what their responsibilities are at this point. Shamar James, you can deal with somebody not knowing their assignment. Princely Human Milan or Antoine Powell-Ryland, like those are guys you go, okay, we'll accept some mistakes from those guys. You can't have the mistakes from the guys who've been on that defense for 2, 3, 4 years. It just can't happen. And so, those are the things they're going to have to really shore up. Now, I think some of this is like, if you look at college football this year, it's just been weird. And the weirdness, when you got Texas A&M losing to Appalachian State, you got Missouri State coming in and almost beating Arkansas. Nobody in the SEC or nobody in college football really got Marshall beating Notre Dame. Nobody in college football is safe from these teams that we think of as lower level teams. And there is an opportunity for these teams to step up. And if you don't kick a quarterback play, there's an opportunity for them to keep it close.
There's 35 guys on the USF roster that are P5 transfers, Power 5 conference transfers. That's a huge amount. These guys were playing at Baylor, Colorado, Minnesota, all these schools just a year or two ago.
Well, so all that being said, you still need to beat them by more than a field goal.
I agree.
But I do suspect, and this is one. So I think there's a couple of things here. One is that Texas A&M sees Appalachian State coming to town and goes, this will be easy enough before Miami, right? Florida comes into the Kentucky game after the Utah game, and a little bit of a letdown there, and then you're like, okay, we got a week to recover before we go to Tennessee. And that's one of the reasons why we say this year after year after year. The reason why the SEC is the most difficult conference in the country, obviously they have the most talent and they send the most people to the NFL and all that stuff, but the reason it's so difficult is because if you don't pay attention to South Carolina, they'll get you. If you don't pay attention to, not Missouri, but if you don't pay, except for Florida, maybe. But if you don't, so Spencer Rattler's been terrible so far, but he's going to have a good game at some point. And if he has a good game and Florida doesn't come ready to play, Florida can lose that game. And I think the thing that we learned from the South Florida game is that Florida can't just roll the ball out on the field and beat teams, even teams that are at a lower level. But I think the thing we learned against Utah is Florida is capable of competing with teams at that level. And I think Kentucky, look, I gave them crap coming into that game, but I think Kentucky's a good team. I don't think they're a great team. I think they're a good team. So, they've lost to a good team. They beat a good team, and they played down to the level of a bad team. And I think the question then is okay, Tennessee's a pretty good team. Are you going to be able to play up to the level of Tennessee? Or are you going to play, or is your level basically that USF game? And are you going to get the doors blown off you? There's a reason why Tennessee's favored by 10.5. And, we'll see what, I think it's much more likely that Florida gets blown out than Florida blows out Tennessee. But I also think, Michael's right and should be. That's been a house of horrors for Tennessee.
I was going to say,
for
it would
decades
take some
now.
stones to put some serious money on Tennessee 10.5 minus 10.5, even though they probably should cover that based on what we've seen. But
so it comes down to
based on history. I don't know if I'd be taking that bet.
So look, I don't think anybody should come out of the USF game pleased, but I don't think anybody should also come out of the USF game like panicking about Billy Napier. I think that's sort of the long range. If you're making, and I said this about Richardson a couple of weeks ago, where I wrote about Joe Burrow and how he struggled for the first 9 games of his career, and then all of a sudden something flipped. And Richardson has that opportunity, but to expect him to flip it right now and have it be perfect right now, I think is probably not useful. Like, it's not something that's going to happen. He's going to have to get these reps. He's going to have to go and he's going to have to take his lumps. And part of taking those lumps might be a loss here or there that we just don't think is acceptable. But by the time you get to Georgia and A&M and South Carolina and Florida State, has he turned the corner? Is that a successful season? And so I think that's sort of the thing we need to be thinking about is what is a successful season when it comes to development of Anthony Richardson? What is a successful season when it comes to development of the defense? So if Florida goes up there and loses by a field goal and it's a good game and they've played Tennessee hard and, Richardson has shown some strides and the defense has bowed up in a few different places. And, look, there was a fumble somewhere that sort of put Florida behind the 8 ball and they're down by 7. And, they end up pulling and it's like a close game where they just can't convert late in the game. I mean, that's a game where I sit there and say, okay, that's a successful trip to Knoxville, even if he didn't come back with a win. But, given what we've come back with every time we've gone to Knoxville, other than that one year with, it was funny. That one year is the one where they were way ahead. And then all of a sudden the doors kind of came off at the end of the first half.
Lost, right. Yeah.
Yep. So, look, I think Florida has a shot. I don't think Florida should be favored. I think it's probably 70-30 Tennessee. I think this USF game makes it even clearer that the Kentucky aberration is maybe more who this team is than the Utah win. But that Utah win is still in there. And so that's the question is, can they sort of summon that together into a performance, or is it going to be, more of Kentucky and more USF? And that's what we're going to find out. That's why this is fun, is because transitive properties don't work. And we've only got 3 data points and we're trying to draw straight lines with data points that just don't really match up right now. And as you get more data throughout the season, that tells you a lot more about where your team is. And so, look, I'm excited to see where Florida's going to be at the end of the year. I think that if Miller had been available, they probably would have let Richardson sit for a drive or two over the last couple of games. But without him being healthy, there just isn't a viable alternative, and they're going to have to go through these growing pains, and that's just the way it's going to be.
I think one of the best things I saw on the field on Saturdays, after a couple of those big mistakes by Richardson, he walked right off the field, right to Billy Napier, and you see the two of them talking very calmly. And I think that's, again, representative of what this season's going to be. Billy's got a lot of coaching to do. There's a reason why he's in town. It's going to take some time with this roster. And if we could play, the one thing you can say about the first 3 games, Will, they've all gone down to the wire. So if we got a full season of this, some of you might want to get your heart checked at the end of the season here, because it's going to test you. This season's going to test you a little bit.
Yeah, I think Napier certainly has a history of 1-score games. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't really know, right? I mean, I think he pulled out some games last year at Louisiana that he probably shouldn't have, given the advanced stats. I think that team was more like a 10-3 or a 9-4 team than it was a 13-1 team. At the same time, look, I think David Wunderlich wrote a really good article over at Gator Country where he talked about essentially that Billy Napier is not Dan Mullen. He's not somebody who's going to be able to take whatever personnel he's got and mold them into an offense that puts up 35 points. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure that I appreciated that coming into the year. I looked at Florida's offense last year and I said, I think Anthony Richardson's an upgrade, so the offense is going to be better. I think Billy Napier, when we've looked at his processes, when we look at the recruiting he's already put up, when we look at hopefully where this recruiting class finishes and the quality of players he's going to bring in, I think the systems and the processes are going to be far stronger. But he's not Dan Mullen when it comes to getting guys who don't fit his system to operate his system. And that's just something that I think we're going to have to acquiesce to. Look, the guy is going to do some things with scheme where we look and go, that's predictable. Why are we running that play? But I think he believes that if he's got the right people running the right plays and they do it properly, that it will be successful. We'll see, right? I mean, that's something that we're going to see whether that is true. But, I think to really get a good gauge, we're going to have his guys in here. And, his guys so far, Kamari Wilson's been pretty good when we've seen him in there. Certainly Shamar James getting a lot of time. Trevor Etienne getting a lot of time there at running back. So the young guys are starting to get worked in. And next year, I think some of the other young guys are going to get worked in as well. And it'll start to look more like a Napier team. But right now, you're trying to do it with smoke and mirrors a little bit. And when your quarterback can't complete a 15-yard pass over the middle, it's going to give you some struggles. So, I think there's reason to be hopeful, but reason to be pessimistic. And, we'll see. I think there will be a lot of people who, if Florida misses a bowl this year, is going to be upset. I think there will be a lot of people who look at it and say, oh, that's kind of what we wound up with. And, we got to give them time to build. That's one of the reasons why this is fun, right? Is that there are different opinions on all this stuff. And there are people who expected Billy Napier to win 10 games this year. So, the expectations, I think, have been tempered at this point. And we'll just have to deal with it.
Yeah, I know a lot of people in the preseason were saying they would take 3-1 at the end of September. I know that for a fact. All right.
Yeah, I think you said that.
I think many people have said that. All right, let's move on to 6 bits here. We're gonna dive in to what we've seen in the first quarter of the season with SEC quarterbacks using Will Miles' favorite proprietary statistics, YAR, yards above replacement. Will, I'm gonna nickname this the Will Rogers appreciation statistic. Because I think you're about to tell us some great things about Will Rogers from Mississippi State, who after that LSU game, I can't even sarcastically have the debate with you anymore. That was a tough look. That was a tough look.
So yards above replacement is an interesting stat. Or I think it's an interesting stat because what it tries to do is it tries to factor in efficiency, both in the running game and the passing game for quarterbacks and how they compare to an average quarterback. So a yards above replacement or a YAR of 0 is an average quarterback. So if you're above 0, then you're above average. If you're below 0, you're below average. And then, it adds value for somebody like Anthony Richardson, right? Who's run this year 24 times for 134 yards. That's a heck of a lot more valuable on the ground than Will Levis, who's run 23 times for negative 23 yards. And this factors in sacks too. So if you're back there just getting sacked all the time, which is where your boy Will Rogers really struggles, if you're getting sacked all the time, then that causes problems. And so what you can do is you can look at those numbers. You can look at an average quarterback's rush. You can look at an average quarterback's pass and say on a per play basis, how much more efficient is this guy than that guy? And so you can start comparing it. So look, it's not a be all end all stat, but I think it's effective at starting to factor these things in. So like an example would be KJ Jefferson for Arkansas is 4th in the SEC in YAR at 1.62. So that's just getting to the elite status, but not fantastic. But what he does is he's averaging 9.9 yards per rush or 9.9 yards per throw and 3.7 yards per rush. So he's actually not that efficient when he's running the ball, even though you think of him as a dual threat quarterback, as opposed to Jaden Daniels, who has a YAR of 0.6 or 0.27. So just a little bit above average. If you looked at his stats, you're like, God, 58 of 83, 6.7 yards per attempt, but he's got 35 rushes for 225 yards. He brings a lot of value by putting the ball on the ground. And in fact, if you look at the game that LSU won the other day, 16 for 93, but he only averaged 5.7 yards per throw. He actually averaged 5.8 yards per rush. But that's one of the reasons why he was valuable in that game is a dual threat quarterback who, instead of getting sacked, turns into a 3-yard gain, has just set you up at 2nd and 7, or a dual threat quarterback who gets you 8 yards on first down instead of having to settle for, a sack that puts you in 2nd and 17. That brings value as well. So if we look at the SEC through 3 weeks, I think it tells a story. So Georgia with Stetson Bennett, 2.66, like that's getting towards Heisman level. And Georgia dominated Oregon, has dominated everybody who's been out there. Ole Miss, Jackson Dart, 1.72. This says a lot about Lane Kiffin, right? Because you got Matt Corral last year who played pretty well. And, Dart's actually playing better than him so far. Now, has Ole Miss played anybody?
Did you see Dart lower his shoulder and run over that Georgia Tech defender?
I did not, but I just I was scrolling over looking at the score. I was watching some other games at that point.
I just saw it on a highlight. Anybody who hasn't seen that highlight, go look it up. Every Ole Miss fan must have been terrified watching that in the moment, but pretty awesome clip after it was done.
So you got Bennett, then you got Dart, then you got Hendon Hooker, 3rd at 1.65. So again, not truly elite. You're not getting truly elite till you get to 2. 1 is kind of like Jake Fromm. So Hooker's between Jake Fromm and truly elite. I think that's about right. He does some things really, really well, but there's some things where he's a little bit inefficient. KJ Jefferson is 4th for Arkansas at 1.62. That's the top tier. Those 4, Bennett, Dart, Hooker, and Jefferson. Those are the guys that if you're facing a team and you go, we're going to have a good performance from our quarterback to win this game. Then you get to the next tier. You've got Kentucky with Will Levis at 0.69. You've got Alabama with Bryce Young at 0.58, which might surprise some people, but that Texas game was bad. And he's only averaging 7.4 yards per attempt this year. Those wide receivers at Alabama are not what they have been in the past.
You mean they don't have 3 first-round picks at the same time on their roster?
Well, I mean, they might. They just haven't stepped up yet to play. Then you got Brady Cook at Missouri. And you got Jaden Daniels at LSU. Those 4 guys are between 0.27 and 0.69. So just slightly above average. Those are guys where you say, look, given the conditions, if our defense plays well, we're not going to have a fantastic game from somebody like Anthony Richardson to win. We're just going to have to sort of hold those guys in place. Now, I think Alabama's a little bit of a different animal here because they're so talented that you probably do need to have a good performance from your quarterback, even if Bryce Young struggles. But look, it's not as though when Ewers went out for Texas, that Texas got this great performance from the quarterback who took over. It's, the reality is that Young just wasn't that great. Then you have the next tier. You've got TJ Finley at Auburn. You've got Anthony Richardson at Florida. You got Spencer Rattler at South Carolina, and you got Will Rogers dead last from Mississippi State. Rogers at negative 1.38, Rattler's at negative 1.28, Richardson's at negative 1.14. TJ Finley actually played decently this week, so he's at 0.14. But so basically, average or below average, you got Finley, Richardson, Rattler, and Will Rogers. And I
think you just created YAR to win your Will Rogers argument.
No, see, so YAR specifically is actually the reason why I have been so down on Will Rogers, because it's an efficiency stat. It's saying, hey, if you average 7 yards a throw, that's below the average distance that a normal quarterback averages. So Will Rogers, even though he's thrown the ball 140 times this year, compared to 77 for Anthony Richardson, has been really, really inefficient when he's done it. And when you factor in the fact that he's got 12 rushes for negative 47 yards, he's really inefficient when he drops back to pass. The average yardage that they get on a pass is down below 6 yards. And so every time he drops back, they are getting worse than they would if they had an average quarterback out there, is what it really boils down to. Now, you can say the same thing about Florida with Anthony Richardson, because he only averages 5.5 yards a throw so far and 5.6 yards per rush. So everybody talks about Richardson rushing the ball and why isn't he running the ball more? And he needs to run the ball more and all that sort of stuff. Well, I mean, he's been efficient running the ball. He's been terrible throwing it. And the place he needs to improve is that needs to be 7 or 8 yards per attempt. And last year, I think he averaged 8.6 yards per attempt. And that's why you walked into the season going, man, if he just maintains that over the course of the year and can keep his rushing average around 5 or 6 yards per attempt, he's going to be fantastic. And that just hasn't happened. And then again, you go back to Spencer Rattler. He's averaging 7.1 yards per attempt, but he's 18 rushes for negative 27 yards. So again, a real negative on running the ball, which means efficiently, he's just not very efficient. And so what I think this does is it gives you a framework to look and say, all right, what am I looking for with a quarterback? Like, all of us have watched that game where you're facing a team and the quarterback runs out on 3rd and 7 and manages to get a first down by a yard. And you sit there and go, God, he doesn't even have real good stats, but we just can't get him off the field. Heck, we just watched that with USF and Bohannon, right? Like, Bohannon had terrible statistics through the air. He really wasn't that good, but he was fantastic at keeping drives alive, making sure that they could convert their 3rd and 3s, their 3rd and 2s, keep the drives going, and just frustrating the Florida defense. And this statistic, I think, in many ways captures that. So it's not perfect. There are other ways to measure quarterbacks. And I think I think you need to sort of take all of the different ways of measuring them. I think, you look at Stetson Bennett, he's got a QB rating of 181.4. Anthony Richardson's at 89. So if Anthony Richardson had played twice as well as he's played so far, he still wouldn't have matched Stetson Bennett. And, so QB rating says a lot about Stetson Bennett and how successful he's been, because he doesn't run that much. But like I said, you look at Jaden Daniels and his rushing stats say something about how good he is compared to his QB rating, which is at 150, which is considerably below Stetson Bennett. Just looking at throwing, you'd say Bennett has an advantage. But once you start factoring in the running, it's still they're still significantly apart. But you'd say like Will Levis has an advantage throwing the ball over Jaden Daniels. But I think if Kentucky plays LSU, we're going to look at that and say, hey, those quarterbacks are pretty close to each other. Same thing if we look at Missouri. So Missouri, Brady Cook has a QB rating of 135. We're going, he's not that good. He's sort of average, maybe below average. But he's got 26 rushes for 159 yards, which means he has outplayed a lot of his brethren in the SEC, certainly. And so when Missouri goes and plays Kentucky, I think they'll have a shot, especially if Kentucky is coming to Missouri, because Levis has been worse on the road than he has been at home.
Yeah, Will Miles invented a stat to continue his campaign against Will Rogers. So I just want to throw that out there. But in all seriousness, we're going to highlight the statistics a little more this season. I know Will's brought it up in a lot of previous seasons here, but it's a pretty cool way to take a different look at how some of the quarterbacks are performing. And we'll check in on it once in a while throughout the season here. But that's a good look at where the SEC quarterbacks stand through pretty much the first quarter of the season here. Well, all right, let's move on to a dollar. And the SEC finally drops the 2023 schedule, and there are some significant shifts for some opponents who have occupied similar spots on the Florida schedule for the last, really, some of them going back the last decade plus here. We're going to start with opening day, game number 1 at Utah on September 2nd. I've seen this game notated as an or August 31st, meaning it might shift there to a Thursday night at some point. But for now, it's listed as Saturday, September 2nd out in Utah. Definitely interested in trying to go to that one. I would love to go out there for a game. FCS McNeese State in game 2. So it's not that 1-2 punch to open the season, although McNeese State, FCS power years back. But they're probably coming here for a beating in game 2. Game 3, the Volunteers traveled down to open SEC play. We've been opening up with Kentucky the last several years here. Good to see Tennessee back in that slot. The Charlotte 49ers come down to the Swamp on September 23rd. Again, probably should be a fairly easy victory there, hopefully, for Billy and the Gators. And Florida travels to Lexington in game number 5 to close out the month of September for another crack at a revenge game against Kentucky. I hope I don't have to use that word associated with Kentucky anymore after next season, Will, but it is what it is. So what's your thoughts on the September slate?
I mean, so first off, can we ask the SEC to release this like in July when we're struggling for content? That would really be great. Like we have no shortage of things to talk about.
It'd be a great March episode.
Seriously, and they decide to drop it in the middle of September when we're in the 4th game of the year. I mean, so I think we all knew that the Utah game was a home and home. That's a non-conference game. You get past that. Florida never goes outside of the state of Florida. Stuff that's always been sort of stated there. Obviously the McNeese and the Charlotte sandwiched around the Tennessee. I mean, 3 home games. We'll see. Kentucky on the road, like you said, revenge game. The thing that I look at, all right, is Cam Rising still going to be at Utah next year? Is Hendon Hooker still going to be at Tennessee? And then is Will Levis still going to be at Kentucky? I think Hooker's eligibility is out after this year.
Yeah,
Levis,
so.
everybody for some weird reason has him as a top 10 draft pick. And then Rising, I think, is going to have an opportunity probably to go pro. So does Florida end up with 5 games to start with, 2 against opponents who should be overmatched and 3 against teams who are breaking in brand new quarterbacks? That I think is sort of I looked at this one and I go, wow, that is a backloaded schedule, but there's an opportunity here for Florida to be 5-0, especially if Richardson starts to show some signs and you see a build into him being good next year. Now you've got a guy who's a returning starter who's started to show those sorts of signs, and all these teams who are having a whole lot of turnover and a whole lot of and a whole lot of change at the most important position on the field. If that ends up happening, then I think Florida might have an advantage in some of these games.
Yeah, I think I'm fairly confident after 3 games that Richardson will be back in 2023. Game number 6, an improving Vanderbilt comes to Gainesville. Game number 7, Napier takes his first trip up to Carolina as the Florida head coach. Bye week, then game number 8 against UGLY. Same weekend, same place up in Jacksonville. Well, first time in a long time that you don't see LSU that is in a non-hurricane or a non-pandemic year, not in that October stretch of the schedule. I know for several years that October stretch has almost been a murderer's row. There's been years where it's like Alabama, Auburn, LSU, and Georgia back to back to back to back. So really a different flavor. You kind of get that ease. You get it kind of ease your way into the tougher slate of the season. I kind of like it. I like the change up. It's not bad there.
Well, I mean, so it's interesting because LSU is almost always sort of the bellwether for Florida season. And in this case, we're going to know who they are before they get to LSU, which is just a weird place to be. Usually you sort of know that. And obviously the hurricane and all the drama that went with that. And then the game and COVID where it's towards the end. But I think even in that case, it sort of told us who Florida was, right? I mean, Florida beats Georgia and everybody's excited in 2020, and then they lose that game to LSU, and it just sort of puts the kibosh on any thoughts that anybody had of playoffs and that sort of stuff. But look, I think Florida has an opportunity to come into Jacksonville 7-0 next year. I mean, you look at this and you go, look, Tennessee is going to be getting better under Heupel, but it's year 2 for Napier, and he should be building. And given, I think we'll sing Heupel's praises, and the preview I think is for most people is going to have Tennessee winning the game this year. But overall, the recruiting at Tennessee has not been great. They've got Iamaliva as somebody who's come in there, a 5-star quarterback, but other than him, the recruiting is sort of where it's been, worse actually than under Butch Jones and some of the other certainly right around where Jeremy Pruitt was, maybe even a little bit worse. So I think that over time that's going to work its way out. And as long as Napier's out recruiting him, I think Florida's going to win. So, you have an opportunity here. You can go 7-0, establish yourself as a big boy in the SEC. What do you do against Georgia? I don't know. I mean, Georgia's built a behemoth there, similar to the way Alabama's built their program. And, you want to take down those teams, right? But, we've also talked extensively about Nick Saban is unusual in terms of what he's built at Alabama and how he's been able to sustain it. And that's going to be one of the challenges for Kirby is he going to be able to sustain the success in the same way that Saban has? And we all thought that Urban Meyer was going to have some long run of continued success back there in 2008 when Florida wins its second national title. And in 2009, it's over basically. And so, does that happen to Georgia? Do they flame out quickly? Or is Kirby able to establish the thing that Urban wasn't able to establish at Florida and that Saban has been able to establish at Alabama? I think this year and next year is going to tell us a lot about that team. It'll be interesting. So, look, I think 7-1 or 7-0 going into Jacksonville is realistic. And that's what the backloading of the schedule allows Florida to do. I think, we weren't going to be 7-0 going into the game against Georgia this year. That was pretty clear given the folks on the schedule. So, there will be playoff talk for Florida, I think 6 or 7 weeks into the season next year, which is cool.
Iamaliva would be an all-time name for the transfer portal, wouldn't it? He's leaving. Get him in the transfer portal there, Will.
It'll be like yours, right? Just go to Ohio State for 1 year and then go back to Texas where you actually want to go anyway.
Yeah. He's just staying. He's a leaver. There we go. All right, game number 9, Arkansas at home. And the first thing I thought when I saw the schedule, that was actually the immediate game my eyes went to, because I said, boy, I'm glad that this one is in the swamp the week after Georgia. It's never the finest performance of the season. You spend all that energy up in Jacksonville. So, for example, I hate the timing this year of the Texas A&M trip, the week after Georgia. That kind of sucks. But Sam Pittman, it's going to be a dogfight. Might as well be in our own backyard. So Arkansas at home, I like that. I like that we're playing that one, the swamp. Game number 10, though, this we talked about that backloaded schedule at LSU. You're finishing your SEC slate, Will, with Georgia, Arkansas, and LSU on the road. It's usually a win. Usually a win against Georgia isn't followed by this type of schedule. It's usually a coast to the finish line in the SEC. Vanderbilt has been around that November slate quite often. South Carolina, when they're not up, it's usually a fairly easy win. But Georgia, Arkansas, LSU, our typical October stretch was just pushed back a few weeks into that early part of November. You finish the SEC slate here at Missouri. You might see some snow, could be some cold weather. We saw the trip up there last year. Hey, if it doesn't go this year for Missouri and it stays on track to not do well next year, could this be the game that we put the final nail of the coffin for little Eli up at Missouri? One can only hope. Game number 12, FSU wraps up the 2023 campaign in Gainesville. Nothing like beating the Noles after a little turkey. Will, how do you feel about the final stretch of the slate and the schedule as a whole?
Again, I talked about all the quarterbacks who might be missing there in the in the first half. I think Rattler will be back at South Carolina. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing for the Gamecocks, given how bad he's been so far. Stetson Bennett's going to be gone for Georgia. The KJ Jefferson probably gone for Arkansas. I think Jaden Daniels will be back for LSU. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Again, I don't know. Missouri, you're going to have Brady Cook, but like you mentioned, Drinkwitz just they haven't looked very good this year. And then you got Florida State and all the rumors going around about Norvell going to Arizona State.
What is that, by the way?
I have no idea.
On all accounts, what is that? What are you doing at Arizona State? What are you doing, Mike Norvell? I can't understand that one at all.
I don't know, but irrespective, I think, Florida State has 3 wins this year, but I don't think any of us think that they're necessarily great. Again, their recruiting has been relatively substandard for what you're going to need to win consistently. So, and then their quarterback position, what happens with Jordan Travis and, I don't even know the Runamaker. What's the guy who's taking over for him? Rodemaker.
Rodemaker.
Rodemaker. I mean, okay. So, is there anybody on the horizon who's going to take over as a quarterback and scare you? So, to me, that's the thing that really jumps out, right? Last year, Florida ends up having to play Bryce Young. Florida ends up having to play, Stetson Bennett. Florida ends up having to play, who else do we play? Basically that Florida has had to play a bunch of really good quarterbacks over the last couple of years. Even Kentucky this year with Will Levis. I mean, as much as I think his home road splits indicate some stuff, and I don't think he's a top 10 quarterback, he's still a good quarterback, right? He's still capable of winning a game.
Yeah.
Cam Rising, he had to play. But now I look at this schedule and I go, who's the quarterback that I'm scared of? And I don't see anybody on the schedule where I go, there's a quarterback there at that place I'm scared of, which means I think you have an opportunity to win. So, if Bennett leaves and Kirby goes back to putting a game manager in there who's worse than Stetson Bennett was, and there are going to be some opportunities to maybe get him. And even Saban in all of his glory there at Alabama, there have been times to be able to get him there where Auburn's been able to knock him off and other teams have sort of cropped up and been able to get him. And when that usually has happened when he's made a transition at the quarterback position. So Kirby Smart's got to make a change at the quarterback position next year just by necessity. And does he have somebody to step in who's going to be just as good? Maybe he does, right? And maybe it turns into a dynasty.
Carson Beck didn't look too bad last weekend.
We'll see. So, maybe he has an opportunity, but it's not as though Georgia was playing with a whole lot of resistance against South Carolina either last weekend. So anyway, that's my take. My take is I look at it and I say, who's the quarterback that I'm absolutely just petrified by? And I don't see anybody on the schedule who I go, oh yeah, I'm scared of that quarterback. Maybe that changes by the end of the year. But, Tennessee, like I said, it's going to have probably some turnover. Utah, probably same thing. Kentucky, definitely. Georgia, definitely. I think Arkansas will as well. There's going to be a lot of turnover. And whenever you have a lot of turnover, it gives you an opportunity. But certainly Florida's going to have to figure out its position at the quarterback position too, because I suspect all the other teams who just got their schedule today as well are looking at it and looking at Florida and going, is there a quarterback there we're scared of? And as of right now, 3 weeks ago, the answer might have been yes. But as of right now, I think the answer is no. Napier's going to have to find a guy. And, so they're all looking at it the same way.
All right, that's our show. Heading into Rocky Top, Tennessee week. Hope you all enjoyed our guest tonight, Michael Bratton from That SEC podcast. Be sure to check his stuff out. Will, any final words before the Gators head up to Rocky Top?
No, I mean, I think we already mentioned the USF game was disappointing. So I think it's been interesting that I felt like it took a while for the noise to sort of build up for Dan Mullen. A part of that was that he won very early on. But that first year, that game against Missouri was just putrid, and the first half against South Carolina was bad, and the game against Georgia was a blowout. And so this is what you get in your first year: you get inconsistency, and you get some games that you think you should win that you don't win, some games you think you should lose that you don't lose, and the hope is that USF game isn't in the column of, yeah, that's who we are. It's no, we got lucky to win it, but there are other reasons why, as opposed to just that being the true talent level. And look, I think we've seen so far is that Florida seems to play to the talent level of its opponents, and hopefully that's what we see this week against Tennessee, is that they'll play up to the level of the Vols, make it a good game, and hopefully come out on top. But even if they don't, I think, you don't want to take one data point, one game, one performance and draw giant conclusions from it. You want to take a holistic view at the program. Same thing with recruiting, right? You don't want to say, oh, we got one 5-star recruit, everything's better. But you also don't want to say we didn't get any 5-star recruits, so everything's peachy. You got to take a look at it and say 5 stars are necessary to win, high-level recruits are necessary to win, but we're going to look at the overall class. And I think that's the thing we're going to have to do is we don't want to make snap judgments after one game where things didn't go our way. We want to make judgments at the end of the year after you've seen the overall portfolio of play. So this Tennessee game is just another one of those data points in that portfolio. Certainly, I think it tells us a lot about the team. It doesn't tell us everything about the team. So anybody who wants to draw conclusions off of this one game, I think is going to be that. I mean, they may end up being right, but they won't be right because it was a systematic look at things. They'll be right because, they made a snap judgment and it just happened to turn true. So that's the thing I'd caution on is you don't want to make broad generalizations for any of these people. Richardson's going to improve. And the guys that they have, guys like ETN are going to improve as well. And so the young guys are going to improve. Richardson's going to improve. And the question is just, can they improve at a rate that's commensurate with what's necessary to win? We'll see.
We'll find out this weekend at Tennessee. Big test for the Gators. Hopefully We're back next week celebrating a win. In the meantime, enjoy the weekend. Go Gators.
Go Gators.
Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel. Join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week. And check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knudsen, joined by Will Miles. And as always, go Gators.